All right, those of you who express interest for PIT CHS registration, I need that stuff tomorrow because it needs to go out in tomorrow's mail for it to meet the PIT deadline. So please get that to me if you plan on registering for it. So again, if you're not registering for the PIT credit, you have absolutely nothing to worry about for tomorrow. So don't worry about anything. Any questions about things that stuff? I don't want to seem like I'm blowing through it. The two papers that you picked up today, and I kind of alluded to this on, I guess, Tuesday a little bit, since we have school on Monday. The one paper where it says at the top, March the 6th due date, those are the instructions for your article analysis. Article analysis is not a big deal at all. It's you taking an article of your choosing, and you're just simply analyzing the way that the argument is structured, the setup of it. So it could deal with topics that you were researching when we were doing the Spartan Base. It could be about something that you have interest in, current events, news. It theoretically could be coming from like a textbook if you're taking psychology or history, and there are some period documents that you want to look at. That would be fine. The only thing I ask is that it be nonfiction. So don't use like Dante's Inferno and Canto as an article and you start doing that while you're doing compare, contrast, or whatever it is that you're doing over there. So just make sure that it ends up being that it's nonfiction. It could be coming from ESPN, it could be coming from Huffington Post, CNN, Post Gazette, whatever the case may be. You can be looking at a digital copy, you could be looking at a paper copy. I really don't care. I think you're better off going with something that you naturally have an interest in, because then you're going to be more apt to take a look at it and try to figure out what is going on with it. So the due date of being March the 6th, that's a Monday. That's not this Monday coming up, but that's going to be the Monday after. So you're still looking in the ballpark of about 10 days from today. The main requirements are you're going to type this up. You're looking at roughly 2 pages because it's going to be 500 words. If you're typing on Word, if you're typing on Google Docs, they do the little word count up there. You want it to be 500 words. If you are at 499, no, I'm not going to say you're going to be struck by lightning and your grade will completely blow up, but 500 words. About a page in like 2/3 or so. It's not a formal essay in the sense of we need 3-line paragraphs and all this kind of stuff, but break it up into paragraphs so that it's not one big mass of text. I'd say if you're looking at 3 paragraphs, probably okay. Something that's going to kind of introduce the concept, then go into a little bit of detail about what you're going to do. Thanks. You do need to include a works cited page. So make sure your 3rd page would be a works cited page. Where's a good place to get a works cited page? Go to Noodle Tools, go to NoodleBid. Whatever article you use, that counts towards your 50. So it might not be anything from a Spartan debate. It might not be anything that you're going to use for a future debate. But if you have something about fantasy football, even though it's now in the springtime, that could still go in as one of the 50 sources that you use for the class. So you can add it into that. The 1 to 5 doesn't mean you necessarily have to go in this order, but a lot of people probably would. Just make sure you identify all of these parts. So what's the subject matter of the article? What are we looking at? Who's the author? What's the article title? All that kind of stuff. What is the argument that the author is trying to present? You're not writing about whether you agree or disagree. It's not an opinion piece. You're just relaying information. So Aaron reads an article, someone dealing with Keystone Pipeline coming through Canada, going through the United States. It's not your job to worry about do you agree or disagree with it, but what is the argument that the author is trying to get across, essentially. What are some counter arguments that the writer acknowledges? That one can be a little tricky sometimes because they won't always clearly state what those counter arguments are, but they might imply it. If you look at the article, you can't see any counter arguments directly stated. You can't recognize any counter arguments that are implied. What should you do? Choose another article. Find one that meets that requirement, because that's one of the concepts we're going to look at. Types of evidence that the author is using to support his or her position, and then you would want to identify at least 1 or 2 logical fallacies that you recognize the author was doing. So if you do those things, you should be in pretty good shape. On the back is then the rubric that is there, so you see how each part would break down into 10 points. So your grand total is 50 points. If It shouldn't be a punishing 50-point assignment. I'm not trying to do the Mr. Frank's negative 37% grades that some people get on the Frankenstein essays. Has he done the Frankenstein essay this semester? Yeah. Good luck. Great. You don't want the negative 37%. That would fail. You don't want that.
So you get an automatic 75.
There were some that I saw in the grade book that were not at 75.
Well, I got a 12 out of whatever. I got an automatic 75, so everybody gets.
I saw.
If you do better than 75.
You don't do better than 75.
But you
Don't even fathom that possibility. It won't happen. Someone did get like a 94, I think they said.
Yeah.
Like a 47 out of 50 or something like that. I definitely saw some 20s out of 50s in the grade book when I was.
Well, he told our class that if you just did the assignment, you got automatic 75%. Unless you did better.
It's up to you. It's one person. So rubric here is on the back. Now, the second sheet that you have is the turnitin.com, which majority, if not all of you, have used before. To save myself aggravation of giving you homeroom passes to go print out at the library, to save yourself the aggravation of trying to get into the library to print, we're not going to print them out. You're just going to submit them through turnitin.com. So those of you who had me last year in English, this is nothing new. Those of you who haven't, you're just going to submit it through turnitin.com. If you have used Turnitin.com before, you can use your existing account that is there. You would just have to add this class to it, and I have all the information on how to do it on here. Class code, password, all that kind of stuff. If you've never used Turnitin.com, you just create an account. You just have to use an email address. Student Gmail would obviously be an option, but it can be whatever email address you would like it to be. I did put both of these documents, as well as Turnitin.com. Well, this document is on the Google Classroom. One of the more recent updates on there. Under the common websites where you were looking at iDebate, ProCon, and all that kind of stuff, I added Turnitin there, and with Turnitin, I then have this document attached to the Turnitin.com website. So should you lose this one, you still should have a way that you can get into Turnitin.com. Try to get into Turnitin.com before March the 6th. If I don't want like issues during second period or something like that, I can't get in. Let me know beforehand if you're having any problems. The due date for this is March the 6th, which is a Monday. You need to get it submitted at some point on Monday, March the 6th. You don't have to have it submitted during homeroom. You don't have to have it submitted by second period before 11:59 p.m. on March the 6th. Just make sure you have your document uploaded, submitted, and turned it in. Any questions? You think of articles up to you. It makes no difference to me. We're going to do 2 of these. So this is number 1. We'll have another one later on. Same assignment, same requirements. Nothing's really going to change there. All right. Good. Oh. Joseph, what are you drinking?
Water.
Water. You're a good man. Ice?
No.
Nope. Keeps it nice and cold, fresh.
That's good.
Your burrito today?
Yes.
Yep.
I wish.
You wish. If only every day could be a burrito, huh? All right. We are going to be taking a look at eloquence today and tomorrow, which we know that Anna wants Mary to become an expert at so that her arguments become much more effective. On Monday, now that would be this Monday coming up, you're going to have a little eloquence quiz. It's matching. It'd be 10 terms on one side. It'll be 10 definitions on the other. You're just simply going to match them up. Your logical fallacy quiz, when we did that, those were examples. This one is not examples. This one is going to be definitions. So if you remember the definitions form, it should be okay. Some of the terms you're going to know, and you might not have to put down a whole lot as far as definition examples. Others, you're going to go, come again? How does that one work? For that one, you probably want to obviously put down definition as well as examples so we understand how it would be working. But we'll start off with some fairly easy ones to get our feet wet first. Luke, why don't you hit the light back there? Not that way. Like, let's take it down. Dramatic presentation. Oh, yes. I mean, is that okay with you?
Yeah, I thought you usually have one on.
Usually I do, but
feeling
Trying to get
dramatic.
outside of my comfort zone. Be a little
Be a little adventurous.
adventurous today. So you gotta do an essay on proof rock.
We have to do, like, to compare and contrast proof rock and Beckett.
What a terrible assignment.
Yeah, I know.
They're literally total opposites. I don't know how, like,
Well,
it's very
it'll be-
difficult to compare.
There'll be a little bit more contrasting taking place than comparing.
Everybody's gonna have like the same essay, because like,
Yeah.
there's only one way that.
So you're cheating off of each other.
No, but there's only one way.
And you are admitting to this on like record YouTube, so I can like send the link to Mr. Hyle and be like, Kendall's that one talking right now.
It doesn't matter. He doesn't like me anyway.
Hear that? Mary, why did Anna want you to use eloquence? Yeah. More hand wave, correct, all that kind of stuff. Eloquence doesn't necessarily make the argument better in that it is stronger evidence. The logic gets improved. That does not happen with eloquence. What eloquence does do, though, is it basically, I'd say the second one more so than the first, helps audiences remember and understand what you have said. You're giving speeches, so there's not a written record of it. Whereas if you wrote a letter, or when this compare-contrast essay or the Frankenstein essay takes place, Mr. Franks is reading it, Mr. Hyle's reading it, I'm reading your article analysis. What did Ryan mention in the first part of his essay? I can go back and look at it again. How terrible was Monica's conclusion? We can go back and look at it again. There's a record of it. But when you're speaking, it's all going to be based on what you say and what audiences hear. So when you do use eloquence, especially things like repetition, alliteration, extended metaphors, it helps the audience better maybe relate, understand, and remember. And so those are all certainly main things that you want to have happen. Plain language, there's nothing wrong with it. It tends to be very direct, but you certainly can have folks who kind of start to tune out with it a little bit, and so the hope is that eloquence is going to help them remember it. With the eloquence, we break it down into two categories. We're going to the first one, and then I'll go into the second category. The first category is referred to as schemes. The second one is called tropes, and you'll get a definition of tropes later on. Schemes involves changing the arrangement of the words, generally from the typical way that a person would say or write something. Essentially, you're looking at the syntax, but sometimes I think that word just kind of scares people. So sentence structure. The most common type of scheme out there is going to be repetition. The tough thing is there's like a bazillion different types of repetition that are out there, and so those are the things that you have to kind of start to get used to. I'm just going to stand here so Ryan can't see anything. You can still see. But Jay can't see behind you, so that he starts going. You could go to Kendall's old seat, and then you'd have like sight line.
I miss
Take
my
it.
own seat.
It's open.
Yeah, but I want to stay there forever. I won't want to leave.
You want to spend the rest of your days in that seat?
Until graduation. Then
How many days till graduation?
if you let me check my phone out,
Like 90 something.
No, it's 92 because 93 is Tuesday. But that includes weekends and breaks.
So calendar days, 90, 92.
And
Yeah, I just want to graduate.
it's like 80 something until senior prom.
Why can't I graduate? I'm like stuck in 11th grade.
That's your
Martin's a senior. I'm still a junior. Whatever. Hopefully you've heard this one before. You'll be surprised how many people, though, will sometimes miss the easy ones when we do our quiz on Monday. So, not saying alliteration is definitely going to be on there, but it can still be the simple terms that throw people off. Alliteration is going to be the repetition of initial or medium consonants in two or more adjacent words. So words that are close together. Now, the big thing with alliteration, though, keep in mind, you're not going to say, hey, I use the word the and them and there. So I have alliteration. Good for me. The whole point of alliteration is that you would be emphasizing key points that you're trying to get across again, so that's going to come across in your reader's mind. In English class last week, we were looking at a JFK speech that he is lambasting the steel companies because they raised steel prices during time of recession and when people are making sacrifices. So
And I'm going to paraphrase, but he does a line along the lines of the steel companies in their pursuit of profit and private power have ignored their public responsibility. So you get that hard P sound of profit, private power, pursuit, private responsibility is going to help people kind of remember it a little bit more. Simple example coming up here from Wizard of Oz.
You clinking, clanking, clattering collection of collisionous junk.
Martin, that's a burrito. That's a guy who wants to go into the burrito. So you have that little repetition again taking place, clinking, clanking, clattering collection of colliginous junk as you're reinforcing it into the audience. So some of the examples are going to come from speeches, some will be music lyrics, some obviously coming from movies, but you at least kind of get to see how the device, how the form of eloquence works. Alliteration, the tongue twisters, Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Those would be easy ways to kind of remember that stuff as well.
How many times can you say that?
What's that?
How many times can you say that?
I think that was like my limit. Addie's stuck on the how much wood could a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood, and she was like, how much wood? And then her head goes down because she forgets what to say next. Repetition, one of the types of repetition. So we had repetition really before when we were looking at repetition of sound. With this repetition, we're looking at anaphora or anaphora taking place. So you are repeating certain words or phrases specifically at the beginning of a sentence or clause. So you're repeating, could just be one word, could be phrase, but it's at the beginning of sentences or clauses. So Martin Luther King, and this is not his I Have a Dream speech, but let us march to the realization of the American dream. Let us march on segregated housing. Let us march on segregated schools. Let us march on poverty. Let us march on ballot boxes. You have this repetition of that let us march, let us march, let us march. You can also see, and we use King a lot for some examples because he uses a lot of different types of eloquence within his speeches. You can also see how segregated schools, ballot boxes, he does have that use of alliteration, emphasizing the point as to what he's trying to get some change, reform taking place. So anaphora or anaphora, you'll hear pronunciation of both types, repetition, word or phrase at the beginning of successive clauses. And we got another example from former President Obama's initial inauguration address.
One very effective public speaking or presentation technique is called anaphora, which means simply the repetition of a key word or phrase at the beginning of successive sentences. It's a great way of emphasizing a point, and Barack Obama used it often during his inauguration speech in January 2009.
The God-given promise that all are equal, all are free, and all deserve a chance to pursue their full measure of happiness. For us, they packed up their few worldly possessions and traveled across oceans in search of a new life. For us, they toiled in sweatshops and settled the West, endured the lash of the whip, and plowed the hard earth. For us, they fought and died in places like Concord and Gettysburg, Normandy, and Quai San. This is the price and the promise of citizenship. This is the source of our confidence, the knowledge that God calls on us to shape an uncertain destiny. This is the meaning of our liberty and our creed, why men and women and children of every race and every faith can join in celebration across this magnificent mall.
It's not a shopping mall, Kendall. Did we talk about that synthesis essay last year? There was an essay about what are the requirements that should be for a national monument, and they were talking about the mall in Washington, and a person wrote an essay about you should never put any kind of national monument in a mall. It wouldn't make any sense. It will get in the way of shoppers. So we have anaphora, which is going to be at the beginning, which means we also have an option of having something at the end, and that's where epistrophe comes in. So epistrophe and anaphora are like siblings, but one's first, one's second. So it better be the youngest. Why am I biased? That's right. Because I know my life was a heck of a lot easier than my older brothers. Now, if you're worried about maybe trying to remember the difference between those two, epistrophe end is maybe a way that you could kind of remember it. Anaphora, beginning of the alphabet, beginning of the sentence. For some of these, you might want some mnemonic devices that'll kind of help you. But it's the same kind of idea that you have with anaphora, but it's just simply going at the end of the sentence or the clause. So with Malcolm X, as long as you were sent to Korea, Germany, and the South Pacific, you bled. As long as the white man sent you to Korea, you bled. He sent you to Germany, you bled. He sent you to the South Pacific to fight the Japanese, you bled. I would say a lot, it's not always what's going to happen, but a lot of times, in the two examples that we have with King and Malcolm X, if folks are talking about something that they want to do, they tend to put it first. Let us march on segregated schools. Let us march on ballot boxes. If people want to emphasize something that has already happened, that's when they tend to go with epistrophe. And it's more personal preference, but that would certainly be a way that some people might kind of approach it. A much more simpler example, but still dealing with clauses, you have Gettysburg Address with Abraham Lincoln, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. So it does not have to be lengthy sentences, big-time phrases. It can be as simple as one or two words. You're still emphasizing your point, trying to get it across. How do we say this word? Brooke's trying. Can I remember? You remember? Martin doesn't remember. Antimetaboly. Repetition of words in successive clauses or sentences, but you flip the grammatical structure. It's in reverse grammatical order. I'll go back to the definition.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
And that's probably one of the more famous examples that we would have of antimetaboly. So you take the same phrase, but you just reverse the sentence structure of it. You'll hear more common phrases like, should you eat to live, or should you live to eat? Same phrase, you just flipped it. Or they'll talk about it with work. Do you work to live, or do you live to work? What do you think about eating? Eat to live to eat. Live to eat. If you could eat anything right now, what would you eat?
That's a pretty specific question. There's a lot of things that
You don't have like a favorite food? Like, I would take this right now. Spaghetti. Mrs. Kane made spaghetti sauce we had yesterday. Pesto chicken, I think, for tonight. I like pesto. Grilled pesto chicken, because it's so warm, why not? Another example of antimetaboly from President Bush, and this is shortly after the 9/11 attacks tonight. We're awakened to danger and called to defend freedom. Again, you do have alliteration taking place, danger and defend. Whether we bring our enemies to justice or justice to our enemies, justice will be done. So again, you have the same words, just reverse grammatical structure, phrasing of it to kind of help, again, emphasize the point. So antimetaboly can be a pretty effective thing. You just have to make sure you have a phrasing that if you flip it, it still ends up working. It looks like a hand has been superimposed like on the picture holding the flag. It just doesn't look. This sounds like a dinosaur, but it's not. Good job. We didn't even have that one last year for like literary term quizzes or anything like this. This is repetition of the word that's the last word of one sentence, and then that becomes the first word of the next sentence. So you end a sentence with a word or phrase, and then you begin that next sentence with the same word or phrase.
So much in poetry. That's like every line
I start the next line? Because it emphasizes.
You do that in poetry, or it
Yeah.
just happens in poetry?
I do them. So
Does T.S. Eliot do that with Alfred J. Prufrock? Because I've like removed that poem from my memory. I just don't like T.S. Eliot, so.
I like the poem a lot better than Murder in the Cathedral. They're blue novel. He really is. That makes me so
This is some dramatic music coming up for Anadiplosis. I mean, this is cinematic feature quality here. It's a tearjerker. Alexis is being drawn in right now. I can see that emotional connection. Beauty in literature.
Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.
Also known as AP literature.
All you need is love. All you need is love. All you need is love. Love. Love is all you need.
There you go.
2 examples of all that music.
No, there's a couple more, but I figured we were beating a dead horse at that point, so figured we'd move on. What's that? The Yoda quote. Antithesis. If you say antithesis, I'll throw things at you and spray you with water.
Oh.
Did Jess say antithesis? Did Mary say antithesis? Okay. I told Brian Fulton I would give him a swirly if he said antithesis, but then he cut his hair. No, but I'm sure it happened. Okay. Don't sleep. Juxtaposition of contrasting ideas that they tend to be in parallel form. And have an example coming up, although this one's pretty hard to hear. The 1969 moon landing sound quality isn't necessarily so good for this one. And I was just about to say, of course, if you don't think it happened, then, who really cares? But you have contrasting thoughts in parallel form. And you can probably guess what the line's going to be. And I'm standing right here and I could barely hear it, but the one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. And the juxtaposition or the contrasting ideas would be, how do you have something being one small step for man, but at the same time a giant leap for mankind? So contrasting ideas written in parallel form is going to be antithesis that would be taking place with it. Okay. And you do get some liberty, some freedom with it. And juxtaposition in itself, this is really kind of more redundant than anything else. Juxtaposition is going to mean that you have contrasting concepts very close together, but the antithesis is going to be the parallel form that would be taking place. I used to have a T.S. Eliot passage up here, and then I just kept getting mad at it, so I switched to Poe. But assonance is going to be repetition of similar vowel sounds in the stressed syllables of adjacent words. So, and the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of purple curtain, certain, purple curtain, you have that sound that's going to be taking place with it. You don't have to have rhyming words for it to be assonance, but that still certainly would be a way for it. But you have a repetition of the internal vowel sound taking place. I don't think this one gets used in poetry quite a bit. from a public speaking, I don't think this is really going to resonate with your audience quite as well as, you know, maybe something as simple as alliteration or the anaphora, the epistrophe would. It's good for like meter. It works well for songs because of kind of like, you know, the flow, the harmony of the words. But when you're coming up here to talk about Philadelphia's sugar tax and immigration bans and things like that, I don't think that the assonance is one that's really going to necessarily work quite as well as might for poetry. Use assonance in your poetry too. You sneezed. Mary sneezed. She sabotaged your Google Classroom project, and you're still gonna.
To keep your enemies closest.
Okay.
Oh boy.
O.J. Simpson trial. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. So that same sound taking place. Now again, these ones do rhyme, but and then we also have one more. I feel the need for speed from Top Gun. We'll play it just for fun. Can't hear it though. I see Chutko dressing up as Maverick for Halloween at some point in his life. Aviator glasses. Yep. Movie's 30 years old. Climax. Arrangement, words, phrases, or clauses in order of increasing importance. And climax, you're pretty familiar with when it comes to like the story plot diagram. You know, you have your basic situation, rising action, which leads up to the climax. Climax is a Greek word which means ladder, so it kind of makes sense that you would be kind of taking the steps to go up to that. With speaking or poetry, because this is coming from Shakespeare's sonnets, The Passionate Pilgrim, you build up to your most important, significant concept. So it tends to be a series that is going to get written or spoken. They don't necessarily have to be in parallel form, but a lot of times they tend to be, but you are building up to the most important or significant point that you're trying to get across. So beauty is but a vain and doubtful good, a shining gloss that fadeth suddenly, a flower that dies when the first begins to bud, or basically meaning begins to bud, a brittle glass that's broken presently, a doubtful good, a glass, a flower, lost, faded, broken, dead within an hour, which is the point they're trying to emphasize. That beauty is going to be a temporal thing. It's not something that is going to last for all eternity. So you're really getting the climax part down here where you do have that series, parallel form, and then you hit it at home with that last part, dead within an hour. Powerful stuff. And then we got parallelism, and this will probably be the last one that we're going to take a look at today. Similarity of structure in a pair or series of related words, phrases, or clauses. Parallelism, parallel structure, those would all basically be the same thing. So within the Declaration of Independence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. You could, and again, your quiz that you're going to have on Monday, it's matching, so there wouldn't be a question like this. But I could throw out this passage, this quote, and then go, okay, tell me what it is. Ryan could put down parallelism, and he would be absolutely correct. Jake could argue that this is what form of repetition? Our lives, our fortunes, our sacred. He could say it's anaphora, and that would certainly still be okay. So you can get some carryover with it. Example of parallelism where you wouldn't necessarily have that overlap. JFK, pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe. parallel structure where you have the verb, any, and then the noun coming right after it. So in some cases you might get overlap where it'd be parallelism and anaphora. Other cases it's just going to be a parallelism or a parallel structure. It can vary on a case-by-case basis. So tomorrow when we come in, we're going to take a look at tropes, which is going to be more a figurative language. We'll pull this slide up tomorrow, start from there. So the two things that are kind of on your radar right now, Monday of next week, we're going to have a brief little quiz that's going to go over all these. That following Monday, article analysis. So start thinking about article that you'd be interested in. Could be something you've already read. You're doing a 500-word analysis of the argument. Remember, you're not doing an opinion about it. You're just presenting the ideas by the author. Turn it in. Make sure you can register. Include your cited page. You'll be good to go. You could do an analysis about proof rock and
I'm not.
you can do an article analysis of Long's essay. This is where Locke is trying to
Proof rock is fiction, so.
But I'm saying you could do Monica's essay. Like you could use her essay as your article analysis, which is nonfiction analysis of fiction. Technically could. You'd be bending the rules there a little bit.
So we
We're on crime and punishment now.